Arrival in a strange land. Imagine being told your enemy is weak, decadent, and doomed, only to find yourself standing in the heart of their nation, surrounded by endless factories, fields, and freedom. This is the forgotten story of German POWs in World War II, men who came to America in chains and left with their eyes open forever. What they saw shocked them, not on the battlefield, but in the factories, the farms, and the everyday lives of ordinary Americans. This is the story of how America's industrial might became a weapon stronger than any gun. The year was 1943. Across the Atlantic, Europe burned. German soldiers had marched proudly into battle, believing in the invincibility of the Reich. Many had seen the rubble of Warsaw, the ruins of Rotterdam, and the vast fields of Russia littered with broken machines. They had heard the thunder of German tanks and believed nothing could stop them. But war is never certain. By the time Allied armies advanced in North Africa and Italy, thousands of German soldiers found themselves not in glory, but in captivity. Loaded onto ships and sent across the Atlantic, they sailed toward an unknown destiny. For many, it was their first glimpse of America. When the ships finally docked at ports like Norfolk, New Orleans, and New York, the prisoners braced themselves. Propaganda back home had painted America as weak, decadent, crumbling under the weight of jazz and money. But what they saw shook them to the core. Towering cranes lined the docks. Endless warehouses stretched into the distance. Freight trains clattered on parallel tracks, hauling endless cars of coal, steel, and oil. The skies themselves seemed to shimmer with motion planes taking off, cargo blimps hovering, trucks grinding down highways. The German POWs, exhausted and silent, exchanged glances. Here was a nation not starving, not collapsing, but bursting with power.
First impressions, as trucks carried them inland to prison camps, the prisoners stared through barred windows at landscapes that hardly seemed real. Instead of bombed-out ruins, there were busy towns with neon lights glowing at night. Instead of shortages and ration cards, there were stores filled with food. One prisoner, writing later in his diary, recalled, "I saw bananas in a store window. Bananas. We had not seen such fruit in Germany for years. And here they were stacked high as if they were nothing special." Another remembered the automobiles. Even in small towns, Americans seemed to own cars, not just the rich. Streets buzzed with Chevrolets, Fords, and Buicks, each polished and humming. For men who came from a Europe of shortages, where even bicycles were scarce, it was a stunning sight. And then there were the factories. As their buses rolled past industrial cities, POWs saw smokestacks stretching like forests into the sky. They saw shift after shift of workers, men and women, young and old, pouring into gates to make steel, weapons, trucks, and planes. It was not just the size that astonished them, but the rhythm, the unending motion of it all. Life in the camps. The United States built over 400 POW camps during World War II, scattered from Texas to Wisconsin, from California to Maine. Some were vast compounds that held thousands. Others were smaller, tucked into farmland where prisoners worked the fields. Upon arrival, German prisoners braced for cruelty. Many expected beatings, hunger, and humiliation. After all, the stories they had been fed told them Americans were brutal. But the reality was different. The Geneva Conventions were followed. Camps were orderly, food was plentiful, and medical care was provided. Some POWs ate better in American captivity than they had in the Wehrmacht. They played soccer on weekends, staged concerts, and even formed orchestras with instruments provided by local churches. But what left the deepest impression was not inside the camps, it was what they saw outside. The shock of abundance. Prisoners were often sent out on work details, guarded but allowed to mingle with American farmers and laborers. It was here that the full weight of America's industrial power revealed itself. Fields stretched as far as the eye could see, planted with corn, wheat, and cotton. Farmhouses had radios, refrigerators, and even tractors, luxuries most German farmers could not dream of. American women drove trucks, ran factories, and hauled produce. The economy seemed unstoppable. One POW wrote home after the war, "We believe Germany was the industrial heart of the world. But here, every small town had more machines, more food, more power than a German city. How could we ever have hoped to win?" The prisoners were stunned not just by material abundance, but by the spirit of ordinary Americans. While Europe struggled with rationing, U.S. civilians lived with a confidence that came from knowing their factories were unmatched. Factories of thunder, some POWs were assigned to work near industrial plants. They watched with awe as assembly lines rolled out jeeps, trucks, and airplanes at speeds that seemed impossible. At the Willow Run plant in Michigan, the Ford Motor Company built the B-2 Liberator bomber. One plane rolled off the line every 63 minutes. To German eyes, this was sorcery. Back home, aircraft factories were targets of bombing raids, crippled and broken. Here, in America, they were thriving, expanding, multiplying. Other POWs saw the Kaiser shipyards on the West Coast, where Liberty ships' entire ocean-going vessels were built in as little as 42 days. Germans had believed their U-boats could starve Britain into surrender. But with America building ships faster than submarines could sink them, the strategy crumbled. To stand in the shadow of such production was to realize a hard truth: the war was already lost. The human side of shock, not all the shock came from machines and factories. Sometimes it came from kindness. Many POWs were astonished at how Americans treated them. Guards shared cigarettes, farmers invited them to meals, and children stared curiously rather than with hatred. Prisoners expected vengeance; instead, they found hospitality. One German soldier who had fought at El Alamein later recalled, "I had killed Americans, yet their people offered me food. They gave me coffee. They let me listen to music on the radio. It was impossible not to feel respect." The abundance of America's industrial might was matched, in their eyes, by the abundance of its spirit. Letters home, censors carefully monitored POW letters, but even so, glimpses of shock and awe slipped through. Prisoners wrote to their families about farms with more cows than whole German villages, about grocery stores with mountains of butter and meat, about workers who own radios and cars. Some letters carried a sense of despair. If our leaders had seen this country, they would never have believed in victory. America has too much. Others carried a sense of admiration. These people are not decadent. They are strong, united, and proud. Their machines alone could crush us. For families back in Germany, struggling through rationing, bombing, and shortages, such words were almost unbelievable. The psychological war. For the Allies, the presence of German POWs in America was more than logistics, it was psychological. The U.S. wanted these men to see with their own eyes the reality of America's power. When they returned home after the war, they would carry stories of what they had witnessed. And indeed, many did. In post-war Germany, former POWs often became informal ambassadors of democracy, telling neighbors about the land of abundance they had seen across the ocean. Some became lifelong admirers of the United States. Others carried bitterness, knowing they had fought for a cause that was doomed. For the German POWs, captivity in America was more than survival, it was revelation. They saw a land overflowing with power and possibility, a land where abundance was matched by kindness. In letters home, they admitted a truth their leaders never dared speak: the war was lost the moment America's machines came alive. Some returned to Germany with bitterness, others with admiration, but none forgot what they witnessed. This is not just a story of prisoners. It is a story of perspective, of how even in war, the strength of a nation can change the hearts of its enemies.